Welcome to Trending in Education. Mike Palmer here. Today, we're going to be talking about arts education, and I'm very pleased to be joined by Erica Halverson. Erica, welcome to Trending in Education.
Thank you. It is a delight to be here.
It's amazing to have you. You have a lot of stuff going on, but rather than me talk about it, I'd love to hear it from you. Can you catch folks up on your origin story, how you got to this point in your professional life?
Yeah, I will try to make it a quick origin story, but my day job is as a professor of education at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, which, according to US News and World Report rankings that came out today,
Oh,
is the number one school of education in the world.
mm.
So,
Don't get me
but
start. Don't get me started on
I
U.S.
know,
News and World
buy
Reports.
buy with that, whatever,
I
50
wouldn't
cents.
I wouldn't wrap my fish in the U.S. News and World Report's rankings, but congratulations. You must it
But
still
it
must be something good going on there. I agree.
and I think it just helps me as an educator and as a person who is paid
Yeah.
to study and share big ideas in arts education,
Hmm.
give a legitimacy to that
For
and
sure.
say that people think this is an excellent place to study education.
Hmm.
And I am one of the reasons, one of the many reasons
Yeah.
why.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
my PhD is in something called the learning sciences,
Sure.
which is an interdisciplinary field in education that focuses on what does it mean to know and learn stuff, both
Mm.
cognitively. So what's happening for people, quote unquote, inside their heads, but also socially, culturally, historically. So how do we understand knowledge and learning as interactive,
Yep.
culturally and historically situated
Hmm.
processes? And then how do you design learning environments that take advantage of what we understand good knowing and learning is?
Hmm.
So, my intellectual heritage is the learning sciences. My professional heritage is as a performing artist. So, I trained in college to be a theater artist. I thought I was going to be a professional actor.
Hmm.
I really wanted to make live performance art.
Yeah.
And when it became clear that the career was not as creative as the craft,
Mm.
and the sort of glib way I think about it is when I figured out I was going to be playing everybody's wacky little sister and grandma for the next 20 years of my life, I thought,
Right.
like, well, I mean, sure, that's a job, but
Yeah.
that doesn't seem like it captures the enthusiasm I have for making work.
Yeah.
I started and ran a nonprofit organization in Chicago that at the time was called Barrel of Monkeys, and it is now called Playmakers Lab. And it's
Okay.
a artist in residence program in Chicago public schools,
Nice.
teaching creative expression through writing and improvisation and performance,
Yeah.
and then working with professional artists to craft the stories that kids make into sketch comedy, vaudeville style,
Nice.
professional performances.
Long history of improv in Chicago, so you picked a
Correct.
good location for that. Yeah.
Correct. And a lot of really interesting historical intersections, I think, in how that form of arts education and improvisation and improv comedy as a more adult oriented art
Yeah.
form, how those two things intersect. So I mushed those two trajectories together to become a professor here at UW who studies how people learn in and through the arts and how we design arts based learning experiences that not only take advantage of that, but that focus on young people who have historically been left out of conversations about what it means to make art.
Hmm.
And so, in Wisconsin, fun fact, is 50 out of 50 in per capita state funding for the arts.
Oh, wow.
Dead last.
Interesting. I wouldn't have guessed that.
Nope, it's actually quite surprising given lots of things about Wisconsin's political history. But that has meant that the arts community and then the sort of doubly marginalized arts education community
Yeah.
has had to really think and innovate around how do we provide robust and transformative arts experiences
Yeah.
for young people. And so I have a program here that's called Whoopensocker, which is an old Wisconsin word. It means something extraordinary of its kind.
Hmm.
So, it was a Whoopensocker of a party,
Nice.
that sort of, you
If
know,
if there's one takeaway from this episode, it's proper contextual use of the word whooping soccer.
that's correct. That's correct. I would be very happy if that is what listeners took from our conversation. So, I run this artist in residence program. It's part of my job as a
Hmm.
professor. And from that, I wrote a book called How the Arts Can Save Education,
Hmm.
which is about how arts practices should transform what good teaching and learning looks like across disciplines. So,
Hmm.
not just like, how do we make a good art classroom,
Right.
but like, how can we use the critique practices that are embedded in critical art making
Yeah.
to make assessment better in the science classroom?
Sure.
How can we, off mic, we were talking about the really robust relationship between the tools of an artistic medium and the concept that an artist is trying to express
Hmm.
and the learning of that relationship. That's the core learning principle of everything that happens in school, right? I mean,
Right. Right.
math is essentially, how do you understand a complicated concept in the world? Use, numbers,
Symbols. Yeah.
letters, equations, symbols,
Hmm.
graphs, graphics to express that. And how do you teach kids about that relationship to give them the power to use those tools in complex concept representation? So
Yeah. Yeah.
I wrote this book, and then to catch up to the sort of Erica 4.0 2024, I translated that into a podcast called Arts Educators Save the World, where successful artists of all media, and so you and I can talk about like, what do we mean by art? What do we mean by artists? Bring their mentors,
Mm.
the people who have brought them along their journey in becoming artists.
Yeah.
And the two of them have a conversation facilitated by me and my co-producer, Alex,
Yeah.
about the impact that arts education has had on both of their lives. And
Cool.
so
Yeah.
the purpose of the podcast is to really uplift arts education as a foundational component. Right now, we're talking to artists of an artist's journey, but I
Yeah.
have a fantasy down the road that we'll start talking with folks who are successful in other kinds of venues.
Yeah.
My dream guest, if I don't know how Michael,
They
how
may be listening. You never
powerful
know. You
you
never know.
are,
Yeah.
you know, Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson
Okay.
is a known theater kid.
Hmm.
He was a high school forensics and speech champion.
Not
He
surprising.
was an actor
Hmm.
and has publicly discussed her arts education as a transformative aspect of what facilitated her incredible intellectual and public success.
Mm.
So that's my fantasy, is that we start saying like, yes, it's actors. Yes, it's
Sure.
Cecily Strong from Saturday Night Live. It's Lin-Manuel Miranda. It's double EGOT winner Robert Lopez. It's all these folks, but it's also, you know, former NBA player Kevin Love. It's
Right.
also Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson.
Yeah.
So that was a long story, but that's my journey, which is what I assume brought me here to talk with you today.
Yeah. No, I think there's a lot of through lines there that make sense, and they're consistent with themes and topics that come up on the podcast a lot. On this one of the themes that I find really interesting is just the push towards making things that I think has been emerging for some time now. Maybe, the YouTube generation was out there, everybody was an influencer. There's a lot of research now talking about the impact of that. Mostly bad, but there's still some other things going on where I think everybody who has a phone now can be a creator in a more
Mhm.
foundational way. And then how do we then, we made it this far without bringing up artificial intelligence, but I also think AI and the push to STEM to me has almost introduced a counter flow, a counter push in the other direction, which is what's going to remain human? Where can we kind of continue to find meaning, find shared meaning? A lot of that is through storytelling, through shared narrative and mentorship, coaching. And, in some ways, I think some of what you're doing is an important counterpoint to perhaps an overemphasis on technology tools for the sake of tooling and STEM for the sake of stemming. Stemmer's going to stem, you
Stemmer's
know,
going to stem.
Stemmer's going to stem, but let's at least get an A in there. Let's throw the
Make it a
arts into
little
the
steamy.
steamier. Let's steam it up. But I do think there's a lot going on there in terms of characterizing the problem space that we're
Mhm.
talking about. You mentioned funding around arts education. It's always good to put a little fear of God in people in Act One. What's the problem space that you're talking about here? And then maybe we can get into some of the things that people can do to act against it.
Yeah, that's great. And I also want to kind of respond a little bit to this challenge that the AI challenge as if it's a new challenge in
Yeah.
education.
Yeah.
And I said many years ago to a colleague in engineering, this was maybe 2006 or 7, who was bemoaning students' lack of care in their studying as the problem
Mm,
of why students weren't learning.
mm,
And he said, cheating is such a bad problem in my class. And we're not talking online cheating, right? We're talking students sitting in a room together
mm.
that, I'm just so disappointed in students. And I turned to him and I said, any exam you can cheat on is a bad exam.
There you go.
And he looked at me like, first of all, I have no idea what you're talking about. Second of all, kind of how dare you
Right.
place the problem with the task
Mm,
rather than the
right. Was
students?
he wearing pearls? That's
Yeah, yes, he was wearing proverbial pearls,
clutching them
um,
proverbially.
clutching proverbial pearls,
Yes.
um, or a proverbial pocket protector. Maybe
Oh, yeah.
is that the
That's
academic version of
that's
pearls?
that's a little, yeah, it's a little on the nose, but for sure. Yeah.
Some sort of pocket protector. And to me, the AI question in learning is the identical, it's just another version of that same problem, which
Mm,
is what are we asking students to demonstrate?
mhm.
And if we're asking them to demonstrate something that a generative AI can pump out for them in 10 seconds, my question is that worth generating?
Right.
And it may be that it used to be worth generating
Mhm.
because we didn't have easy access to information consolidation and, the representation of a particular genre of writing that you
Yeah.
had to recreate every single time. So I'm not saying that that was never useful,
Mhm.
but if a tool can do those things, then my question to pedagogues, to teachers is what is the human contributing component
Mhm.
to that work? And how can we focus on students making that? And, we've known in the kind of eggheady education research world for many years that we learn by making,
Mhm.
right? We learn through creating artifacts
Yeah.
that surface both our own expertise, but also our own misunderstandings.
Sure.
When you make something and it doesn't work, it's pretty clear that you don't totally understand how that tool allows you to share a concept. If you're
Right.
wiring something and your little robot guy doesn't light up, there's something you don't understand,
Right.
right? And so we have known for a long time that learning, the demonstration of learning is not some kind of abstract pseudo psychological,
Mumbo jumbo? Yeah.
mumbo jumbo, but rather like in the creation of the representation of the ideas.
Mhm.
And so AI scares me less because it seems to me yet another iteration of that challenge
Mhm.
rather than some sort of new, new Godzilla, you know, tearing through the world of school based or formal learning based, projects and problems.
Yeah. It does make me wonder about the future of education then. And,
Yeah.
we are in a kind of critical phase right now where it does seem like
Hmm.
a paradigm is shifting. The type of thinking you were expressing back in 2006, the
Yeah.
world had not caught up to and arguably still is not caught up to. However, I think there is a broader awakening around maybe the way we assess people, the 5 paragraph essay. Why is that a thing? And if it's so easy to train a bot to do it, maybe it's not something we should be asking humans to do. But then at the same time, it begs the question of, well, what actually should we be asking the humans to do? And
Yep.
that's where, to me, looking to the arts and arts
Yep.
education
That's right.
makes some sense.
I think that's absolutely right. And from an equity perspective,
Mm,
the way we've handled this forward thinkingness is to say, yeah, we should think forward, but only for kids who know basics,
hmm
whatever we mean by basics, right?
hmm
For kids who don't do basics well, they need remedial, drill,
Yep.
phonics,
Yep.
worksheets, and so in fact, I think the revolution needs to be more, more revolutionary. That's a terrible way to say it. But that, we don't want to just say, cool, this is an add on.
Right.
This is like great for the kids who have the basics. Now it's time to make stuff,
Yeah.
which is what's happened.
Yep.
And instead to say, no, no, the making is the thing.
Yeah.
The making is the thing for everyone.
hmm
And then there are just in time skills and tools that we can more easily identify as needed for any kid's success. I'll give you an example. So I
Yeah.
run this program called Whoopensocker, and it's an artist in residence, creative arts residency where we teach expression
hmm
and we use writing, we use drawing, we use improvisation, we use performance. The goal is for kids to express their ideas.
Yeah.
What that does is put all the kids on the same playing field
hmm
in terms of the quote unquote skills that they're bringing.
hmm
And so many kids who are identified as struggling, identified as behind, identified as not as good as their peers are already coming into those experiences nervous.
hmm
And so what the arts practice does is start with the assets and mean it, right? Like, oh, that kid's got a lot of jokes.
Yeah.
His fine motor coordination may not currently afford him the opportunity
Yeah.
to write it down in the form of a paragraph,
Sure.
but dang, that is some tasty wordplay. And how can we as artists
Mm.
uplift what he's bringing, celebrate it,
Yeah.
and then he's motivated,
hmm
right? He's like, oh, people like my jokes?
Yeah.
Okay, well, how do I then continue the development of my joke making
Yeah.
as like a part of who I am as a scholar? Well,
Right.
I better learn to write better.
hmm
How do I get access to that?
Yeah.
You know, how do I use, an audio translating device to help translate my jokes into written form so
Right.
I can see what they look like,
Yeah.
so I can practice them?
Mhm.
Or what if, we get tons of kids who are brilliant in their home language,
Yeah.
but who are identified as struggling because their written phonetic English proficiency
hmm
is not as quote unquote, not as good as it should be. Well, what if kids figure out that there's a way to translate that
Yeah.
electronically,
hmm
that they can then figure out how that translation works
Right.
in their head?
hmm
So it's the arts allows us to take a student learner asset focused look at what we're doing
hmm
rather than a skills focused look.
Hmm.
which is what we have been doing, and which is why when a robot machine can do the skill,
Yeah.
we're panicked.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And then at the same time, there's concern even within the arts that some of
Yep.
the new AIs are actually hitting us in places that we thought we were safe, that we thought humans would have free reign and not be
Hmm.
bothered by the disruption. In the last year and a half, a lot of the more creative jobs that are out
Yeah.
there. Another topic that comes up a lot is the future of work. There's sort of two aspects to it. One is the risk within quote unquote creative jobs, which I've
Hmm.
problem with pegging just those jobs as creative to your previous point. But then I think the flip side is more the awareness that when people make things, when people build a portfolio, when they build the self-confidence and the ability to kind of say, I did that, as a parent of a 5-year-old, I'm very familiar
Yeah.
with that
Yeah.
awakening that is coming within. In essence, I think there's a real hunger for that in a lot of our professional lives. So I'd love to get a little bit of your thinking about how arts education might translate into preparing people for really unsettled, unclear future of work that's out there. I think there's probably some insight and perspective you can get by thinking like an arts educator.
I hope you're right about that. I think you are. I mean, I think this fundamental learning that to be smart in any discipline is to understand how the tools of the medium and the discipline
Yeah.
afford you the opportunity to understand, play with, and represent complex concepts in that discipline
Yeah.
is the thing that will prepare you to be successful in whatever the job is, right?
Right.
Like
Right.
to understand, for example, what the generative AI can do
Hmm.
allows you then to make it a tool rather than a first and last only stop,
Right.
right? I'll give you an example from my daughter's life. So she is a high schooler and she has been really involved with the music program in her high school. I think she has one of the finest music educators in the country
Mm.
is her choir and kind of vocal music teacher at the school.
Hmm.
And she's been doing a cappella for the last 4 years.
Yeah.
And when she started, she was a singer. And, that she was presented with arrangements and she learned her part and she performed. As she's gotten older, because it's a student run group, the more senior students have to make the vocal arrangements.
Mm.
So the way a cappella works, which I did not know prior to being an a cappella parent, it's like being a soccer parent. You have years of whatever your child chooses to
Yeah.
look forward to that.
Uh-huh.
You know, arranging the music is part of the art form.
Mm.
So you
Mhm.
you find a song that is instrumentalized, that has a rhythm section, and you have to figure out how to translate that
Yeah.
into voices.
Yeah.
And so Gracie had to not only figure that out as a task, but she had to find the tools, both digital and analog, right?
Mhm.
There are digital, sheet music making software. I'm not even calling it the right thing.
Yeah.
But, and so she has had to learn how to do that active translation
Yep.
and figuring out what chords can do and what diminished thirds, what kind of mood that gives.
Yeah.
And, and that skill, I don't care if she never arranges another a cappella song again, but I would love for her to walk into any kind of intellectual situation and know, okay, what tools are available here?
Yeah.
How does that help me solve the problem?
Mhm.
Okay, these tools I know how to use. What the hell is that over there? I need somebody to help me learn how to use this tool to achieve that goal.
Yeah. I love it. It
And
reminds me a lot of like, there's and I'm not knocking critical thinking. I'm a big believer in it. People are talking about how critical thinking is important to be applied across varied contexts. I 100% buy
Mhm.
into that. But I also think a maker's mindset, a performer's sensibility is equally, if not more critical to the future of work when you start thinking about where will we be seeking humans.
Hmm.
There is an expressive element to it. There is an element of engagement and emotional connection that I think we're going to be seeking out. And
Hmm.
frequently, those types of things are stifled in a more traditional classroom. And then, I completely hear your point too. Just send your kids to art class where they're able to be free and expressive for, 40 minutes and then come back and, okay, now it's back down to learning time. Feels like a misunderstanding, just like
Yeah,
you don't go to a separate critical thinking class.
exactly.
You need to apply
Exactly.
it across.
And a couple of other of those kind of skills that we say we value. One is innovation,
Mhm.
that I think, working within constraints affords you the capacity for innovation.
Yeah,
And so allows you to be like, oh, well, what does this thing do?
yeah,
Right. Where if you, if there's some set of tools and constraints that you don't have to worry about,
yeah.
that opens up the possibility for you to worry about things that you never imagined, prior to walking in. So
Mm,
that's it. So innovation is one. And then the other one is failure,
mm,
which is we have positioned failure as the lack of something.
mm.
If you fail a class, if your school is failing, we've positioned it as like it's a lack of learning.
Yeah,
And, in a creative process, failure is a core part of what it means to learn. Like
mhm.
you can't learn something unless you're like, nope, whoops,
Yeah,
or, here's a spectacular way not to do this.
right.
And here's how that's going to help me iterate and improve in the future. And again, we tend to be open to that within arts experiences, which is great.
Yeah,
But then we shut all of it off completely when we send kids into quote unquote traditional classrooms, right? And
yes.
failure is the thing to be avoided at all costs
Mhm.
rather than like, I don't know, take a risk.
Yeah,
My undergrads hate when they first start working with me and they ask me a question and I go, I don't know, try it.
yeah,
And they're like, what do you mean
yeah,
you don't know?
yeah.
Aren't you the boss? Right? And I'm like, if I knew, I wouldn't be teaching the class
Right.
because what's the point? If I
Mhm.
could just tell you all the answers,
Yeah,
why are we sitting here? So, all of those ways of knowing and doing, I would die happy if we could figure out a way to politically advocate for those ways of working
yeah.
in all learning spaces. And, yes, more arts. Yes,
Mhm.
make art every day
Right.
and
Yeah,
make math every day, make
right.
physics every day, make all those things every day.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely, and the "yes, and" which you were mentioning there
Hmm.
brings me to improv, and
Yep.
I think of, Robert Fulghum's book, Everything I Needed to Know I Learned in Kindergarten. I feel like there's a corollary, which is everything you really need to know you can learn in improv, and frequently it involves failure. It
Yep.
involves going with it. It's
Hmm.
collaborative, another big one of the
Hmm.
big C's, critical thinking, creativity,
Yep.
collaboration. It's got all those. It's also got a little comedy. There's an extra scene
That's right.
just for tricks. But it is, I think, a place where people learn how to be vulnerable, learn how to rely on others, learn trust. Folks don't feel psychologically safe nowadays. And I think there's a lot that can be learned from the power of collaborative, expressive experiences, which is very much, I think, what you're talking about.
Plus 1000. So the chapter in my book about teaching uses improvisation and the rules of improv as
Mm,
the foundation for how we ought to understand what good teaching is,
yeah.
exactly for all the reasons that you just said,
Hmm.
right? We need to scaffold people into risk taking
Hmm.
because risk taking is the only way you can learn,
Mm,
but you can't just say, hey, everybody, take a risk,
right.
right? You have to create the conditions and walk people
Mm,
toward the taking of the risks.
hmm.
Collaboration, I think of collaboration as an outcome,
Hmm.
right? Where in traditional models of learning, collaboration is the pathway to the
Yeah.
thing we really
It's a
care about.
tactic. Yeah. Hmm.
The group project, right?
Hmm.
Everybody hates the group project because actually
Mm.
no one cares about the collaborative outcome.
Right.
If we, when you put on a play,
Hmm.
you have to care about the collaborative outcome because
Yeah.
you cannot do it by yourself.
Bill
Um,
Shakespeare said the play is the thing.
the play is the thing. And if we're talking dream guests, by the way, that chapter of my book is my Bible is Tina Fey's memoir, Bossy Pants.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And she has a section
Mm.
in her book about how improv is sort of the foundation for good life skills
Yeah.
and lifing.
Yeah.
And I kind of translated some of that into, but what if we directed it toward a particular form of lifing
Yeah.
that we call teaching?
It's funny.
Because
For a second there, I thought you wanted AI Bill Shakespeare as a guest, and I was thinking maybe that could be arranged.
that would be fun.
Tina Fey could also. I mean, Tina, if you're listening, Erica would
Yeah,
love to have you on.
yeah,
Erica, it's been an amazing conversation. We're hitting on a lot of stuff, and maybe pursue this in a future engagement. But if you wanted to hit on some big themes for our listeners as they head back to the rest of their
yeah.
lives, what are some takeaways perhaps from our conversation?
Well, I think one of the things I'm trying to accomplish is to center the experiences of art making as core of what it means to be human
Mm.
and core of what it means to care about education.
Mm.
So if you are a person who cares about school or informal learning or your own kid,
Hmm.
right? My main message is then you need to care about art making and you
Yeah.
need to advocate for in your own life with your children, if you are an educator in your school,
Hmm.
or if you are a community member with your public school, museum, public library, advocate for the uplifting of arts experiences as a core part of what it means to do teaching and learning, not just a thing that's nice to have if we have time,
Hmm.
which is how the arts have been positioned in the educational discourse.
Right.
And what I've learned from 18 years of doing this job and publishing articles no one reads but are very carefully crafted is that that kind of repositioning only happens with large scale public advocacy. It
Mm.
doesn't happen when Captain Professor Lady says, in my article in the Journal of the Learning Sciences, it clearly states,
Yeah.
that, right? It happens when parents and teachers and principals and legislators and school boards, all say, "God, what are we doing?
Hmm.
Why aren't we, instead of, you know, speaking loudly and more slowly, the same things that aren't working over and over again, why don't we do something differently? Why don't we reimagine how learners make ideas?"
Mm.
So that's kind of my big message
Yeah.
is for listeners to really think about where does education show up in your life and where does the arts show up in your life and how can you advocate for those two components of your humanity as being one and the same.
Mm. Absolutely. Lots to think about in terms of integrating the arts into education, arts education, a trend we're going to continue to track with folks like Erica Halverson. Erica, also, if folks we'll include it in the show notes, but if folks want to track any of the
Yeah.
things you talked about, what are the best places to find you?
Well, I would love for people to listen to and subscribe to and review my podcast, Arts Educators Save the World.
Okay.
It's available wherever you get your podcasts. We also have a website, artseducatorspodcast.com. If folks are interested in the book that I talked about, you can get How the Arts Can Save Education anywhere you buy books. Certainly your local bookstore, but also the Amazons, the Barnes and Nobles is. And I have a website, ericahalverson.com, which if people are like, no, I have some words for you, Dr. Halverson, I am accessible through my website.
Amazing stuff. Real pleasure having you on, Erica. Thank you so much for joining.
Thanks, Michael. This is just a great platform to talk about these ideas. So thank you so much.
And for our listeners, hopefully you enjoyed what you heard. If you did, please subscribe, write us a review, do all the good things. We'll be back again soon. This is Trending in Education.